both first run, and I wasn't one of them, I will admit. I ran for city council. I lost by 17 votes. And I'll tell you what the difference was. I was not the safe candidate. I was a little bit too far to the left for some folks in my area. And, it's in the past. So in the future, I expect all of you to move to Piusville, Maryland, and vote for me. So there's more than 17 of you in this agreement. But people ask me all the time, why did you punt? You've been doing this for like 40 years. Why all of a sudden you decided to run? And I was very clear when I started this that the reason why I was running was because, one, democracy was in danger. And two, because one of the things that I always open with, and I'll open with this today, is that the local is global. So we all think about this savior is going to come from the sky, and we're going to make the right president, and, we're going to be saved. Do you know what the opposition has been doing all along? Roaring. They've been running small campaigns in small towns. Just openly, speaking about who they are as conservative family values, just blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, they're now Congress people. I have no intention of doing that. I just want to be very clear from the again. That's not my intention. But for many, there is that intention to be Congress people and to be senators and maybe even presidents. But they didn't start at the top. They started by running for education committees, not even councils. Here in Washington D.C. for the neighborhood associations, right? The ANC. In many of our towns, they were part of the committees that the city appointed, and they moved their way up, and they pretend to be one thing, and once they get a hold of power, all of a sudden these agendas start to move forward, and there's nothing we can do about it. And so one of the things that I hope we accomplished today is not just talk about what have we accomplished, if so, but really do a forward look into, great, we've done all of this, so now what? Or, there's so much yet to do. Because the other thing that happens is once we get elected or once we have something, apathy sets in. I'll give you some of the best examples I know. I remember, I'm old enough to remember doing the die-ins in front of the Boston, the Massachusetts House. And really speaking for our siblings who were dying of AIDS at the time and nothing was being done. I remember tying myself to, well, never mind that, I'm getting in trouble, so anyway. But there was direct action that happens, and all of a sudden, we had drugs to combat the pandemic. We had, care still incredibly lacking. People said, great. And then we passed marriage equality. Half mine. Good. And we went to sleep. And the other side said, now is the tough. And now we have a Supreme Court that might indeed undo everything we've accomplished in the last 50 years. So we got it always, as my sister says, activate. Always have nothing, cannot fall asleep. And so with that, what opportunities that I'll start, I'll start directly. Well, and say to my left, I always sit over there, I'm like feeling all kinds of sorts of ways about it. But now that the midterm are almost over, with hope, at least they should be over by December 31st, so that new Congress can be seated. What do you think we can do in our organizations and in our communities to continue to move and edit what was given to me, human rights, Of course, the civil rights are part of a larger agenda around human rights. And so what do we do? And if you can, on that opening minute, also give me something about you and what brought you to this template.
Will you keep it up? Hi, folks. I'll start with something about me. I am a formerly undocumented woman. I am also queer. I've been out for as long as I can remember, since I was 17 years old. I was one of the first people in the undocumented youth movement to be openly queer and undocumented, and played a key role in Florida, especially, and being part of that first generation to openly share my story, both of those stories. So that's a little bit about me. I've been a saint, but it went south. I think I carry that in my blood from the amazing women in my family. So when I think about the opportunities in this moment, I am thinking about young people. I'm thinking about millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha coming up after that, who are more and more unapologetically trans, queer, non-binary, and identifying as queer, trans, and non-binary at younger and younger ages. So it's actually not a coincidence that in this moment where these young folks have shown and flexed their political power, the power they have to influence LGBTQ people, we have the power to influence races that are at the margins, right? Like, this is a growing voting bloc, and it's not a coincidence that as these folks, as these young people, as we're coming of age, that we're also facing incessant attacks across the country. What more strategic way for conservatives to undermine someone's political power than to undermine their sense of self, to undermine their access to language of who they are? So when I think about opportunities in this moment, if I could quote our previous Advocacy and Action Director at the task force, youth aren't just the future, they're the present and now, right? And what are we doing to make sure that we are showing up as elders, as mentors, femtors for them in this moment, because it is a challenging time. And I also I just got back from Florida. We're doing midterms in Florida. The Task Force Action Fund, we're working on making sure LGBTQ people and our allies had all the information we needed to show up in the polls in Polk and Hillsborough counties. I would be remiss to not share with you that the opposition is ruthless, is completely careless with our human life. And I think that's why we must be unapologetic and unflinching about who we are, right? Who we are as queer people, who we are as allies, who we are as Latinx people, who fundamentally, support our community more than I think we really get credit for. I think there's a lot of efforts right now, a lot of mis and disinformation that's being planted in Latinx media, driving narratives about the queer community, and we know these myths to be untrue. And there's also so many Latinx parents. I gotta tell you, like, the phone banks we were doing, like 40% of those people making calls were moms. They were, they were moms who were showing up for their queer kids. And these are mothers that are showing up. They didn't go through any popular education or necessary political education training. Lo llevan por dentro. Right? So I think it's vital in this moment that whether you are an ally, whether you are a parent, whether you're a person that identifies as LGBTQ yourself, you're thinking about the stories that we drive in media around Latinx issues and LGBTQ issues, because right now the right is driving a lot of myths about our community, and they're just untrue. They're untrue. If I could, and then I'll just close with this. I'm named after my mom, Mayra. I call her Mayra, the OG. Yeah, I always joke because I think the reason I am so top is because I was raised by her. 4'11", so you know she means business. All Latina moms under 5 feet, you don't mess with. And I have to say is she is one of the fiercest advocates for us, right? So I'll just leave us with that. And I have to say I'm just emotional. I'm also just coming out of campaign mode, so I'm tired.
If they don't.
Yeah, that's something getting inspired. And we got a lot of work before us, and we also have a lot of power. That's why they're coming after us. That's why they're coming after our young people. They wouldn't be coming after us if they didn't feel threatened by our political power. I'll just think, yes, thank you this year.
One, that's a hard act to find in the stone. Do you need something, some onion?
We cried for food.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, LULAC, for inviting me to speak here this morning. I'm originally from Mexico, Mexico, immigrated with my family when I was 4, and grew up in Central California, outside of Fresno. My parents and grandparents were all migrant farm workers. And so I feel very privileged now to be in this space where I'm able to advocate on behalf of my family back home, but also the broader Latinx community, the LGBTQ plus community, in a variety of spaces that I've been finding myself in. In terms of opportunities, I think what the election showed us, and bouncing off what Mayra said, I think we do have to be ruthless in our as they are against our community, in showcasing our power, and that was showcased in a variety of ways. I think pro-education, pro-LGBTQ plus rights candidates won in many spaces. Back in 2021, after the Virginia elections, after the governor there finished his campaign and showcased how going after trans youth, going after educators, going after immigrant communities was a winning strategy for him. Republicans took notice and they ran hard. That we saw this cycle were really, really tragic in a variety of ways, but particularly for young folks. And so we were encouraged. I think the opportunities exist now for the local level. We won in school board races across the country in spaces that we didn't think that we had any opportunities to do so, which is crucial for protecting the human rights of our students and our educators. We won in state governors races where they're going to be kind of at the forefront in battling the state legislators who are moving aggressively against LGBTQ plus rights across the board. We won at the congressional level. Obviously, we're still waiting for the final results, but we elected Becca Ballant in Vermont, a former educator, middle school teacher who brings valuable experiences LGBTQ, a person herself. Robert Garcia, the first LGBTQ plus immigrant elected to Congress. It's exciting. Those are all opportunities for us, and we had to take hold of them. As just a quick example, earlier this year in April, we had one of our members, Elizabeth Hull. She's a librarian up in Pennsylvania, and she testified in front of Congress on the issue of book bans. There was one morning that she went to her school, went to her library, typical day of school, and she discovered that all these books were just gone. The school board had told administrators to go in over the weekend and take out any books that reference LGBTQ plus issues, any books related to, real Black history, real Latinx history, real API history, and they just took them out without any checks and balances, any input from both trained professionals and librarians, from parents, from students. And so those, I think, hopefully are the types of things that we can start combating against with some of these school board, local level candidates that are going to be coming into office. And that's our role now, is to push them to actually protect the human rights for our students and our educators.
Okay, it is so right.
That's good. Yeah, my name's Art Motta. I'm the National Policy Director at the LULAC National Office. And at LULAC, we say that we're a nonpartisan national organization. We have members from all walks of life. As you know, we have folks that are, still in their, I don't want to say old ways, but ways of how their grandparents were raised, hardcore Roman Catholic Latinos, and then we have us on the other side of the spectrum who are more progressive. We want to see more progressive change in our day-to-day life, but also we want to stop having people question our humanity, our civil rights and human rights, having to justify why we deserve to live day-to-day, having our life on the ballot, is definitely disheartening, in some states, deciding whether or not we can marry the person we love. A lot of my proud activism and organizing work goes back to an election in 2008. The same election where we elected the first Black president. People also voted in California, which we thought was a progressive state at the time. On the ballot, they voted that marriage was between one man and one woman. So on the same ballot, people we thought were progressive, but not progressive enough. So having to do that, luckily, it was overturned by the court system. But that was really disheartening, and it's happening to the state too. We're seeing it in different capacities. We want to see LGBT representation, but also not only that, but also want to see people that will not only walk the walk, but also talk the talk, but also walk the walk. Once they are in their decision of power, they use it for good and not for bad. We have allies in congressional representation in Congress. This cycle we lost 2 congressional LGBT leaders in Congress. That was a race that went really bad in all directions in New York. But we have some new LGBT leaders that will be joining us in D.C. in the new Congress. Vermont, in Illinois, of all states, Illinois is sending their first LGBT member of Congress to D.C. to represent them. And of course, in California, too, the first LGBT immigrant. But also in the same scope, there was a race in New York City where there was an LGBT Democrat and an LGBT Republican never competing against each other. First in all of our, U.S. history of 2 LGBT folks competing against each other for a seat in Congress. So we knew that one of them was going to win. In this race, the Republican won. So the first out, an LGBT Republican, is coming to Congress, which, is a different situation in itself, but I won't get into that too much. Like, I had to look up the race and see that. If you look up this person, they're on. It's great to have the LGBT, representation, but for me, it's not the right representation that we want. Folks that are saying that we're fine the way that we are, that we don't need explicit laws that state that, marriage is between anyone, not just a man and a woman. A person that was in D.C. on January 6th who claims that they were not at the Capitol on January 6th, but there's photo evidence that they were near the Capitol. A person that supports these laws that we're seeing across the country that are popping up that we refer to them as don't say gay bills popping up. Some of those are on the ballot. In Florida, we're seeing the repercussions, the consequences. How folks not taking a tougher stand to help us and be allies in the situation where we need the most. It's a lot of overbearing work for us to do it on our own. So when we call on others to stand by our side to do the work with us, most of the time, we get silence. So it falls on us. We're tired of having to do this work ourselves, but we have to keep doing it, because if we don't do it, no one else will. I always tell myself, and I tell people around me, take it one day at a time and be notable each and every day. Notable to yourself, notable to at least one person. If you're sharing space with people, be notable in that space. If you're sharing food, breaking bread and sharing space is beautiful in whatever place you are. If you're enjoying a refreshment at Uproar like we were last night, or if you're going to break up a pupusa together tonight at Tamarindo, wherever you are, enjoy that moment, because you don't know what the person is going to. We all bring our own different story to this room, and I don't know what brought us here besides Jesse, but being in this room together, hopefully, there's something that will inspire you to be notable and whether or not it's enjoying a dance tonight or, looking up the LGBT members of Congress that will be coming to DC in January and taking space in the halls of Congress. We'll be there providing, shining the light on their work, but also letting them know that we are going to keep them accountable. If they're shedding a negative light on our community, we're going to be explicitly clear about why they're doing more harm than good. I'll go ahead and stop there before I keep talking. Yeah, there's a lot going on, so I'm ready to share space with you all.
Back in 2014, the state of Maryland did something that was unheard of at the time. We actually formally tied two campaigns together. For those of you who are not from the state of, from the DNB or the District, Maryland and Virginia, we made a concerted effort to run the DREAM Act of Maryland together with marriage equality. Still in a fight with Maine as to who was the first state to pass marriage equality by vote. I said from Maryland, I would say it was Maryland. The fight with my friends from Maine and all that would be. But one of the biggest critiques that we had was from, the queer community, why are we working with that? Right? They're breaking the law, like the typical, racist tropes that you hear, and then from the Latino community, are they really Latino? Queers are just white people, right? Is this idea that if you're a person of color, you're straight, and if you are, even a dreamer, right? That these were just straight folk, and that the question around if you're queer or not. So it was the tactics of our opposition were to divide us on that, and we were very clear that we were not going to do that. And we have some of the largest percentages of acquit. This was not a squeaker. This was not a raspa cum laude, como decimos en mi país, right? And yes, I am Puerto Rican. So it shows that when we join forces, we are stronger and we win with better opportunities than others. And so I posed a question to you as we move forward. What are some of the issues that you see opportunity for us to tie our struggles together? Because for many of us, and Mayra, you're a perfect example of that, if you don't mind highlighting, because you already did it, that we are one and the same. I don't wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm a Latina butch dyke. Which hat do I wear today? No, I'm a Latina butch dyke. I'm a Puerto Rican butch dyke. And the struggles of Puerto Rico, the struggles of my, of my relationship with my wife, and, my non-socially conformist, gender expression, one of them doesn't stay home when I leave the door. So when I walk into a space, you get what you get.
Sure.
So I'll start with this one, and figure out, particularly in education, where there's so many attacks that, that are happening. How do we work to improve education? How do we find places for us to unite? And what do you see as some of the challenges? Oh yeah, do you have 30 seconds with me?
No, I think unfortunately we'll be playing a lot of defense still in the education space. There are opportunities to be more in the offense in some spaces, but I think both at the federal level and all the way down to the local level, we're going to be battling against the three big buckets that we've been seeing already. So those are the so-called pure Bill of Rights, the type bills that we've been seeing introduced in a variety of spaces that supposedly are for parents to have a bigger voice in their child's education. It requires educators to meet with parents a certain number of times. It requires parents to be able to speak at school board meetings, all rights that they already have. But it also requires educators to post publicly the school curriculum or the class curriculum for the entire school year prior to school year beginning. Requires librarians to post any and all resources that students have access to. And so those are just shadow ways to start banning books that attack or that provide resources for LGBT plus students, or Latinx students, or all students of color. And so that's one space that the two communities will have to unite against, because they're going after all communities at this point in very friendly named bills that disguise their true intent. They're also still introducing so-called women Bill of Rights to go after transgender youth in schools, barring them from joining athletic teams, barring them from going to school bathrooms. They're the Stop the Sexualization of Children bills, or the so-called Don't Say Gay bills. Those are also appearing still, and it will appear next year as well. And those are particularly going after, our trans youth specifically, but specifically our Latinx, people of color, trans youth, and a lot of these spaces. One quick story as well. We had another educator who testified in front of Congress earlier this year, Willie Carver. He was an LGBTQ plus educator at that time in Kentucky. He was Kentucky's Teacher of the Year, started gay straight alliances at a school, was well loved by parents of students, and then when he won Kentucky Teacher of the Year, his school district decided not to give him any recognition of that because of the fact that he was queer. The big organizations that are funding a lot of these fights, when the other side still found out, they created, they bust in folks from around the country to protest at school boards. Why does he have a position here? Why is he doing all this? Three of the only other LGBTQ plus educators in the whole district all resigned out of fear for their safety. And he stuck through it until the end of this school year. He decided that was enough, and he also resigned. And he talked about, there were Latinas, specifically queer Latinas in Kentucky, that he was their only, mentor in the space. And I can only imagine what those students now are going through in a lot of these spaces, but that's happening across the country. And so we'll have to continue this advocacy. We'll need to unite the two movements to provide support for these students and our educators. Well, if we don't have queer POC educators in the classrooms, who are students going to look up to? So looking forward to continuing that fight, unfortunately.
Thank Art.
Yeah, we see day after day more hate and signs of hate. And even though hate in and of itself is not a crime, when you act on hate is when it becomes a crime, usually resorting to violence, or political violence is what I call it. That's what it is. We're seeing an influx of folks attacking not only LGBT folks, but also immigrants that want to be a part of this country. At LULAC, we were founded as immigrants and still are. People that want to call it the U.S. home, and we're at different levels of assimilation, acculturation, whatever you want to call it. But still to this day, we have folks that are dehumanizing us, and we're fighting back, of course. You've seen the stories of certain state governors busing migrants across the country. Here to D.C., some of us have activated our networks to help those migrants that were dropped off at Union Station in front of the Capitol, in front of the Vice President's house. And we have folks that have been trying to help folks get situated wherever they were dropped off, of course. But also, when you think about what's going to happen over the next 4 weeks in Congress, we have a very short window before the new Congress takes place to really push any must-pass bills. And we're going to try to push a DACA bill over the next few weeks. We're going to be working with a lot of our partners here in D.C., a very small window to have the Senate pass the American Dream and Promise Act. I think that's the most viable bill instead of starting from scratch on a new bill, which some folks want to do, but we have a very short window. So we have to try to get to 60 votes in the Senate It is doable. It's a hard job, but we'll do it. Because when you think about our undocumented youth as well, over 800,000, if it follows the national, LGBT population, at least 10% of them, at least 80,000 to 100,000 are LGBT, whether or not out publicly, but privately having to keep that identity of themselves, private too is another monstrosity, that people can't be themselves. We're still in 2022. So helping those folks, establish not only residency, but, on a pathway to permanent citizenship here in the U.S. is another responsibility that we have here at the national office, of course, but also going back to hate. It was on the ballot. We saw the response there. But we're seeing, you did a good job of talking about what we're seeing in the education space. But what we see down the pipeline is that they're going to come after students even harsher. Next is they're going to come after students' dress attire, what clothing they're allowed to wear and not wear in school. It's a shame, but that's something that's coming through the pipeline. What type of attire men should wear, women should wear. That there's no other gender besides men and women. There's only going to be certain clothing that students would be allowed to wear to public schools, to private schools, to charter schools. So that's something that I'm keeping an eye on to see how we can fight back. Because depending on how this Congress outcome will go, that's going to be another fight that we're going to have to push next Congress, fight back against folks telling us not only how we can live our lives, but also what clothing we can wear. And, I don't have a very good fashion sense, but many of us that do, or you in the room, your clothing, what you wear really, it explains a lot of who you are. Before we go on to the next question, if you're able to, I'm going to ask you to all stand for like 2 seconds. If you can stand just for a little bit, if you can stand. Stretch your legs. And then you can go ahead and sit back down. So, I have a question.
And
just a quick question. When you stood up, how many of you were like changing your clothing and stretching out to like fit into your clothing? Raise your hand if you had to like stretch your clothes or adjust your clothes. Right? So even clothing is not made to fit our bodies. It's made to fit a specific standard out there. So even what we wear, the options of where we can make our clothing, where we can buy it, some folks are resorting to making their own clothing because that's part of our identity. What you choose to wear on your body, the sign, the letters that you get to wear on your body, that's an expression of ourselves too. So I'm saying this because at LULAC National, we're ready for this fight. We don't want to do it, or we don't want this fight to happen. But something as simple as being allowed to wear the clothing that you choose is going to be another fight that we're going to have to face. But together we can fight back against that. So
Yes. And I know you all did a great job of highlighting what's brewing at the federal level. I also want to highlight things that are hyper-local, right? Examples that are of intersectional campaigns that are hyper-local. In Orange County of Florida, you may have noticed is one of the only counties that's like it seems like a little blue island if you all have been keeping up with the maps. In Orange County, Florida, the whole community centers, one of our partners on the ground, one of our partners on the ground, the Hope Community Center, is working on passing county IDs in the state of Florida, right? And this is essential for undocumented people to access everyday services in Florida. And it's not a coincidence that this fight is also being led by queer and trans people on the ground. So they're also pushing in this fight for county IDs, for there to be the option for folks to mark an X gender identity and be able to have an ID that aligns with who they are. In light of Hurricane Ian, this is where like these inequities and like the everyday discrimination that queer people face like really come to light. Because shortly after Hurricane Ian was coming, right, and it was Whole County, Orange County, these counties in Florida were on its path. there were shelters who were saying that you needed an ID to access the shelters, right? So you literally were excluding a whole population of undocumented people in that state, and also like queer and trans people who don't have access to an ID that aligns with their gender identity. And it's really in the face of these disasters that a lot of these inequities are like unveiled for those of us who aren't living those everyday experiences. And it's like a hyper-local campaign that, you know, is being led by like queer trans people, and they're making sure that it is as inclusive as possible. So I think examples like that are really great to highlight, because the right has really, I feel like, taken ownership of these small local campaigns. And there's a lot of ways and avenues that we can do that can really change the everyday lives of queer, Latinx, and documented people on the ground.
Thank you. One of the things that you mentioned that I keep thinking, for this, the person in talks about, in the city of Hyattsville, we're a sanctuary city. And so documentation is irrelevant to your voting, and you can also vote after the age of 16. So one of the things that I learned in visiting my ward, in particular as I was running my campaign, is that many of us don't know that. Because we're afraid that if you show up to vote, Amiga's going to be there, what happens? And so the two things come out of that. The first one is there's not a comprehensive database that folks can go to. And by the way, just, and I think, it's well known, but many might not in this one be aware that we are probably one of the most tech-savvy generations, particularly young people, depend on our phones. And I'm not talking just in general about young people. I'm talking about Latina young people are some of the savviest tech folk in the country at the moment. We make be able to do most of our the communication with my nieces, with all my nibblings. You can go until the cows come home. You send a text, hi, hey, and it's like a 3 hour later. I'm like, can we just pick up the phone? It's going to be a 15-minute conversation. Okay. But so, people ask, like, where do I go? Like, how again, how do we push for these resources to be bilingual or trilingual, not just for the Latinx community, but also for a growing API community in this country, with all of the implications in terms of languages and so on. And so, it doesn't quite exist. And so the other thing that doesn't exist is that we pass all these acts, right? All these laws. And with the exception of the Shepherd-Bird Act, I've yet in the last 15 years seen a piece of legislation that has an actual budget line for education. Because we can pass all these laws. And I think what I just mentioned is a great example. All these laws without a public education component. Therefore, they are, it has no change behavior. They're punitive in nature, which means that if you break them, you get punished, but you do not get educated so that you don't. And I'll give you a very personal example. Again, I go back to the fact that I am a Latina Polish. That means that most people don't know Puerto Rico, like I didn't choose to be a citizen. I'm not sure if I would have chosen to be a citizen. However, Jones 1917 said, hey, we need you all Latinx people to go to war so that our folk can stay home. So the exchange was taking of a citizen, right? So when I get spit on or yelled at for being brown and for being gender not conforming, all of those things should have been avoided had there been educational moments in which people are actually goes to education, goes to public advocacy, goes to self-finance. So I highlighted some of it's not there yet, but we want to. So I think that as organizations, we need to continue to push that there are significant money spent on education versus punishment. in all that, that we do. And so having highlighted what is not there yet, maybe you can highlight some of what your organizations do have now that will help us, or where you're moving your organizations to cover. Because let's be clear, just because we are, civil rights organization doesn't mean that we do it nice. How that doesn't mean that we do it right. Doesn't mean that we do it period. So, all right, we'll start with you.
Yeah, a lot coming to the pipeline, but of course, at LULAC, we are a membership-based organization. So my goal has been and will be to make sure that we incorporate our members into the discussion more and more. Over 1,000 councils across the country, and as we work to increase the number of Lambda LGBT or WIO councils across the country, folks have a space locally so that they can, share space, but also do some more of the policy work as well. But being attuned to what's happening here in DC, monitoring again what the results will be of the election, that'll dictate, whether or not we have allies or if we're going to be doing a lot of defensive work here in DC. But something that LULAC has been doing since the pandemic, of course, is looking at every issue as a civil rights issue, but also through a Latino, Latinx, Latina lens. We saw when the pandemic happened, many of us were able to keep doing our work from home on our laptops, through our iPads. We had access to technology, to broadband, to devices, but many in our community did not and still don't. And during the pandemic, 1 in 3 Latinos, Latinx, Latina people did not have access to a device or internet. So we're looking at it as a civil rights issue. It should be a public infrastructure, internet, and not only basic speeds, but a high-speed internet should be available across the country, especially in rural areas where students were forced to hop on a computer. In many areas, it's been called the Zoom black boxes, where the internet speed was so low that they couldn't even turn on the video. That had to be a black box. So teachers are teaching to a black screen. Hopefully a student was on the other side being able to learn through a black screen. So we're working to make sure that we have many folks in our community, making sure that our councils have access to not only sharing that news with our community, but also whether it's devices or learning how to sign up for programs with the federal government, like the Affordable Connectivity Program, so that we can have access to the internet. Our people can help us do, or can do their own research and learn how to use the internet for good. Internet's used for bad, but we're going to focus on the good of that, and knowing how folks can be connected. There's some folks that are joining us online, sharing space with us remotely, but looking at that, of course. But as we go back to our mission at LULAC, our mission is to advance the economic condition, educational attainment, healthcare, housing, political influence, and civil rights. But there's so much more that isn't encapsulated in the mission. And it, we do our work more and more. Even though LGBT work isn't in our mission, it's still our mission day to day. So we're going to keep doing the work that we know that our community needs. Where there is a void, we'll be there. So, yeah.
So I'm really lucky to be at the task force in this moment. We're turning 50 years old next year. It's our 50th anniversary. Then 50 years old is still young. Or anyone comes for me. So it's a really exciting moment, and part of the vision that Kira and Dawson and I want to drive forward is about really reviving the task force as a political home for LGBTQ people from all walks of life, right? Historically, the task force, our conference Creating Change, has been the space where people come together to celebrate Awansat, to train, to learn the tools they need to have in order to come back to the fight. And we're really wanting to make sure that that is happening at Creating Change, and it's also happening year-round through our partnerships. So, we've been really excited to be re-entering some of our field work since the pandemic. It's been a bit of a hiatus, but we're really excited to be growing along Central Florida, especially in that I-4 corridor. We started a little smaller this year with a school board campaign. We also engaged in the Attorney General race, the Task Force Action Fund did. And ultimately, this is just about building the political power of queer people year-round, and it goes beyond races. It's making sure folks understand that voting, participating, and a civic engagement campaign is one of many ways to become engaged. And a fun fact about our campaign this year is most of the people that were making phone calls, most of the people that were canvassing were not eligible to vote, either because they were too young or they were not U.S. citizens. So that's just an example of the many ways that folks can engage our democracy and some of the things that we have coming up the pipe this week. Right. What?
At NEA, a lot of our resources are headquartered on neaatjustice.org. That's kind of where our social justice resources kind of live. And within my portfolio, immigration, we do a lot of work for undocumented students, undocumented educators, unaccompanied minors who are arriving at the border, making sure that they have access to education. Police reform, ensuring that police are held accountable for their actions against especially people of color, working on the school-to-prison, school-to-deportation pipelines that disproportionately impact LGBTQ plus students of color, and of course LGBTQ plus issues. On that website specifically, we have model the school resolutions for folks who want to advocate for things at the local level to ensure that their school boards are being as inclusive as possible. At the state legislature, we have model bills for LGBTQ plus curriculum, talking points, whatever you all need. There's a lot of resources on there, so I would encourage you to take a look at that and connect with our NEA affiliates. We have 3 million members across the country. We have state affiliates in every single one of the states, and we are particularly concentrated in rural areas. So a lot of folks, a lot of our most active and largest affiliates are in the big cities, but we actually collectively have more folks in the rural parts of the country. So even if you don't think we have folks there, we have folks fighting for a lot of these issues. So I would encourage you all to connect. Thank you.
Thank you. For 2 questions. 3 if our panelists answered them, yes, no. So any questions you might want to direct to our panelists? One. Go.
This real question is one of something that happened in Orlando. Is I happen to have a chapter in Orlando. My company has a big presence in Orlando, so we were having events at the Q Center in Orlando, and we had to move the location suddenly because there was a protest for the KKK and evangelicals, and people were afraid. So we might have about things that happened, and that's when I share that. What?
Thank you. Well, give me 1 second. I just want to make sure. I just
want to invite the NEA and the task force to engage our local LGBT councils out there that are, and every council, but specifically the LGBT councils that are in here. They want to partner, not just with the local folks, but the national folks to get their messages across. I'll be happy to share the presidents of all the councils with you via email, and feel free to reach out to them whenever you're doing local events, because they're looking for that partnership.
So my name is Stephanie, and I'm the DC LULAC chapter, and I'm I've been working in campaigns for since 2017, and one of the reasons I actually kind of stepped away from it was because of the burnout just feels really real, and especially with with everything that's going on around the country, around students. I feel like sometimes I know that sometimes I feel like I want to get involved because I know that it matters to me, and as you said, not us that move. But how do you but I'm also trying to balance with self-care. So how do you balance being present, being part of that, but also not giving away all of yourself to the movements that veterans yourself, if they can put into this?
This is actually vodka in here.
There's a whole different crowd.
That's a different type of self-care that we won't talk about here, but that's a good question. Like, especially in the campaigns, I give props to people that are able to do that nonstop. It's a fight that many of us have been in for decades, generations. The last 2 cycles I had to stay out of just because of my mental capacity, because I know that you will get drained down. So being able to provide support to other folks and giving them the tools to leave that fight, and it's okay to have a supportive role in this work. Some people like the spotlight, others we just want the work to get done. So being able to again provide that support, feedback, the tools, share what worked, what didn't work. When I think back to one of the first campaigns I worked on in college in 2008 was, one of our tactics was to TP houses that had that, that marriage sign that said marriage was between a man and a woman. So we spent thousands of dollars on toilet paper, but that's not the viable solution for everyone. But that worked for us. That helped us de-stress, but also, show a sign that we're here and we're not going to get, let a ballot say that we don't have a right to our humanity. But definitely rest. Here in D.C., I love that we have Rock Creek Park so close to us. During the pandemic, that was like my escape, just going out there on walks. Before I knew it, I was going on 10-mile hikes up and down Rock Creek Park. It's beautiful out there to just get out there, enjoy nature, take off your shoes and just feel the grass with your bare feet. It's beautiful. It's just one with the land here. I do recommend that to enjoy even time alone. Not to be alone or lonely, but enjoying the time for yourself to refresh your body, nourish not only your spirit, your mind, but also your physicalness too. So, good.
I would agree with the rest. I also am a big believer in finding joy with other folks who are in the fight alongside you. There's a ton of us. I just joined NEA about a year and a half ago and was shocked, especially by the number of queer Latinas who are educators. And so just finding time just chat with them and catch up on like random things that is very unique to our culture that many other folks just wouldn't understand. But they give me like the rejuvenation I need to continue fighting. So whenever you can, finding those opportunities to do that.
So I think this piece around self-care, wellness is essential for especially queer people in this work. A lot of us have experienced so many kinds of trauma and just living in our own bodies and our own existence. And what I've learned now at 30 years old, it really starts to show up in people's leadership, when people are not doing that work of caring for themselves. So I would say that always needs to be number one. That is a campaign. That is, caring for yourself is part of the campaign, right? And check whenever you get into the trap of like all or nothing thinking, right? Like I have to go all out. I have to attend to every march. I have to go to every meeting. I have to sign up to every task, and actually think through where are the places that are compromising my well-being. Because the moment you compromise your well-being, not only are you not being good to yourself, you could cause harm because you're not taking care of yourself. And this is stressful work. This is a stressful time, right? So for me, that has looked like making sure I spend time with my mom. No more than a week. I can't do more than but I do need like every couple months I need to see her. I've noticed that's something that I need and that it feeds me. For some folks it looks like just not talking to anybody for some time, because I also recognize the pandemic has done all kinds of things to our social abilities. Sit with yourself and figure out what that looks like to you and what that's going to look like for you throughout the seasons, but never compromise yourself, because I can tell you it really shows up and it's not good for you or anybody.
As the official elder, I used to at Creating Change, I used to teach a workshop for, what the hell is time out? it part of that is that we are, for two people of my generation, had this belief that you have to work 24/7. We've lost too many elders. The lack of time off is money out of any of us. Because let me go back to just because we're civil rights and decisions we were doing well. We don't provide good health care. Don't provide with time off. You don't provide. So if your workplace has a union, make sure that that language is embedded in your contract. If it doesn't, then talk about this later because we can have a campaign. All about is go see a silly movie. Life is serious enough that you should be okay with seeing, like, I'll tell you personally, I just went to see Black Panther with my spouse. And we're having dinner afterwards, and then she's like, literally dives into the social analysis of the movies, and I just went to see Black Panther. I just wanted to connect in the past. So take your time out, do silly things, but also talk to others about what it is that you need so that we can, as much as it sounds counterproductive, organize to get all of that done. And so what I will say is this, in closing, I want to thank our three panelists for being honest and for being here on a Saturday morning, which I know it's not easy. I want to challenge you to remember the history of LULAC. Many of us think of LULAC as the conservative organization versus other organizations out there. LULAC was the first national Latino organization that passed its resolution on marriage equality. Don't ever let them think that just your reputation is not everything. And so the fact that we are here today is a game. And go out there in this, pure Latino lives, because we know that our personal stories with our parents, with our children, with our lives are what change minds. We do not have a queer Latino national organization that is pan identity. And I'm very clear on that because I think that Bambi and the Translating Her organization do a magnificent job. We no longer have a DEPO, we no longer have a DELOS, we only have a national trans ID, kind of like all things. So, with that, what we have are places like this where we can organize, we can troublemaker, we can find the solutions. So that, thank you again for being Thank you so much, Tisbeth.